Ian Murray, MP, is in our London studio. Good morning.
Good morning, Gordon.
I don't know if you saw John McDonnell there talking to Andrew Marr, but I think a reasonable précis of what he said about changing Labour's position on Europe was that he wants to do it and he would like Jeremy Corbyn to hurry up, but he understands why he's consulting on it, which means actually nothing's happening.
Well, it's a bit of déjà vu because not only has John McDonnell, but our Shadow Foreign Secretary, our Shadow Secretary of State for Exiting the European Union, Keir Starmer, and most of the Shadow Cabinet have been trying to change the position now for several weeks, if not months. The entirety of the PLP, with the exception of a handful of members, want the position to change. Party members and supporters want it to change. So you have to ask yourself the question, who's preventing that change from happening?
Well, the suggestion in the papers this morning is it's advisers to Jeremy Corbyn and they should go.
Well, the position of the Labour Party is quite clear that if the party moves to a full Remain position, which is a confirmatory vote with the option to remain and campaigns for Remain, that it'll get a significant boost in the polls. All the statistics show that at the European elections, the Labour Party lost 4 times as many votes to Remain parties than they did to Leave parties. So even on a purely naked election footing, you would suggest that we'd have to move to a Remain position. And if advisers to Jeremy Corbyn are stopping that from happening, they have to go to the party. These are unelected people. I don't want to be criticising staff, but these are unelected advisers, and the entirety of the Labour movement wants the position to change, with the exception of a handful of people around Jeremy Corbyn and the leader of Unite, Len McCluskey.
So you think that those advisers should go?
Gordon, sorry, I didn't pick up your question there. It just
you think those
there.
Advisers should go?
Well, it's not for me to decide who should be working in the leader's office, but obviously they're advising the wrong thing to the leader of the opposition. It's quite clear, as I've already said, that Labour is hemorrhaging votes to Remain parties and not hemorrhaging votes to Leave parties. And what's quite clear here, and has always been the case, that Labour voters who voted Leave are much more Labour than Leave, and Labour voters who voted Remain are much more Remain than Labour. So that tells you all you need to know about where the Labour Party needs to be. But even if we take it off the naked election purposes and the figures, it's the right place to be for the country. This leader of the opposition has to do what's in the national interest. And what's in the national interest for the economy, for our politics, for our culture, is to keep the UK in the European Union.
Okay. Just going back to a phrase you used there about if there was a confirmatory referendum and Labour campaigned for Remain, because as I understand Labour's position, and it is difficult to understand, but certainly going by what Len McCluskey was saying last weekend, the position seems to be Labour wants a general election, after which it would win, it hopes, then renegotiate Brexit, and then whatever it negotiated would be put to a confirmatory referendum. But under those circumstances, presumably Labour would have to campaign for Brexit.
Well, I find that as confusing a position as you do, and Len McCluskey must be the only General Secretary of a major union in this country who wants to campaign for something that would mean that his members lose their jobs. All the economic analysis from every single credible source shows that. So that is not the position of the Labour Party, that's the position of Len McCluskey.
Isn't that, as of now, Jeremy Corbyn's position, as far as one can divine it?
Well, if that's the way you want to define it, but the position of the Labour Party officially, and this might not necessarily be the position of the leader of the opposition, it is the conference position that was put forward back in last September. Now, we've voted down the Prime Minister's deal. In fact, the Prime Minister is now just about to leave in a few days' time. There won't be a general election. Anybody in the Labour Party who wants a general election now, when the Labour Party is on 18% of the polls, is really not in the same planet as the rest of us. So that means that we have to move to a confirmatory vote with the option to remain. That is the position and the policy of the Labour Party. That's the position of the Shadow Chancellor and of the person who's responsible for this policy, the Shadow Secretary of State for Brexit, Keir Starmer. Now, if the leader of the opposition, after days and days of debate with the Shadow Cabinet at Shadow Cabinet meetings on a Tuesday morning, can't come to that position, something must be blocking it. I'd like to know who's blocking it. I'd like to know why they're blocking it. I'd like to know why they're not doing what's in the national interest. That's why we're sitting at 18% in the polls, and something has to be done to reflect on that.
Would you like to try to answer the series of questions you've just asked?
Well, I don't really know the answer to those questions. I think those have to be posed to the leadership of the Labour Party. I'm not in the room to be able to determine who's doing that. If I was in the room, I'd be fighting very hard, as I have done so for the last 2 years, for a confirmatory vote with the option to remain, to let the people have the final say. So we demand to know, the PLP demands to know, the public demands to know, Labour Party members and supporters demand to know, and if they don't get the answer that they're looking for, they'll do what they did at the European election, they'll put their cross in a Remain box. That's what's happening up and down the country, and Jeremy Corbyn has to come to
Yeah.
a position on this pretty soon before it's too late.
Is there anything you and people who feel like you in the Labour Party can do to try to speed this process up? I mean, getting rid of Jeremy Corbyn, you tried to do that and it didn't work. So there's nowhere left for you to go. I mean, there was obviously the option of joining Chuka Umunna. That hasn't gone terribly well. He's ended up in the Liberal Democrats. Where does that leave people like yourself?
Well, if you look at what Richard Leonard did after the European elections, he did exactly the right thing. He reflected on the fact that the public had sent a very strong message to him that the position with regards to the Scottish Labour Party was wrong, and he's moved to the position where he should have been in the first place, a confirmatory vote with the option to remain. I'm delighted he's been able to do that, and I hope he's able to put pressure now on Jeremy Corbyn and the National Executive Committee to be able to...
Right, Scottish Labour is not just saying the option to remain. Scottish Labour is saying it will campaign for Remain.
And they're absolutely right to do so, and I'm glad that Richard Leonard's come to that position.
Which could potentially put them on a different side in another referendum from Labour.
Well, we have devolution in Scotland, and we're on a different side on a lot of policy objectives because we're a devolved party in Scotland, and that's the way that the party in Scotland is after the reforms that were put through by Kezia Dugdale. So Richard Leonard's now in the right place. Now, you asked me what can be done to try and change Labour's position in terms of Jeremy Corbyn, and we just have to keep making the case and fighting for that. Otherwise, the Labour Party will continue to lose elections, continue to be sub 20% in the polls, and we'll be letting down the very people that require a Labour government in this country. OK,
slightly different subject. In your view, as a Member of Parliament, is there anything Parliament and MPs can now do to stop a no-deal Brexit, should that be what the next Prime Minister wants, short of other than a no-confidence vote in the government? Is there any mechanism left?
Well, there might be other mechanisms because we still have to pass certain pieces of legislation, but of course that will only happen if there's a deal on the table. If the Prime Minister wants to close down Parliament until October the 31st and walk away without a deal, then the new Prime Minister can certainly do that. It would be a significant dereliction of duty and would completely and utterly devastate our economy. And I'm not even sure that Boris Johnson or Jeremy Hunt would like that to happen, although that's the way that they're talking at the moment in terms of trying to win this very narrow selectorate that of the Conservative Party, which is much more right than actually Conservative voters. So I'm not sure they'll actually go down that route. But your theoretical question about is there a mechanism in Parliament to stop this, it's very difficult to see if there is. We are trying our best to find mechanisms. We had amendments to the estimates debates last week. There'll be amendments debated this week on Tuesday and Wednesday on certain pieces of legislation that might be able to provide us with some way forward. And I'm sure the Speaker of the House of Commons will be making sure that Parliament has its say. Trying to get something binding on the government is a lot more complicated, but I can assure you that a lot of us cross-party and every single party are working night and day in Parliament on this at the moment to find that mechanism and to make sure that Parliament stops no deal. It has voted 3 times already to prevent no deal, but we need to get something binding on the government.
We're going to have to leave it there. Ian Murray, thank you very much indeed.